The gun was already cocked when he saw her face. A woman, young, fierce, cheekbones painted with 2 streaks of ochre and ash. She had a short bow drawn to her ear, the arrowhead steady as a heartbeat. 30 feet of dead grass between them, his finger on the trigger, hers on the string. Harlan Creed had drawn on men twice her size and never blinked. Outlaws, soldiers, a deputy in Abilene who'd been quicker than he looked, but not quick enough. This was different. She didn't flinch, didn't beg. Her eyes locked onto his with the flat certainty of someone who'd already accepted the outcome, whichever way it fell. The wind off the chalky bluffs pressed the sage flat between them, and for one held breath, the world went so quiet he could hear his own blood moving. His hands were shaking. They always shook, had since Shiloh, since the things he'd done with Declan Voss's guerrillas that no amount of whiskey could wash clean. Shaking when he ate, shaking when he slept. But the Colt was the one thing that steadied them. Not today. Today his right hand trembled against the grip like it was trying to tell him something his head refused to hear. He lowered the gun.
Toksa ake.
She spoke 2 words he didn't understand. Her arrow didn't move. 3 seconds passed. 5. And then she eased the string back, slow and deliberate, the way a wolf decides you're not worth the chase. That should have been the end of it. 2 hunters crossing paths on disputed ground, each walking away with their pulse still running. That's how it works in the territories. You meet, you measure, you move on. The warriors came from the rocks like they'd been carved from the limestone itself. 6 of them, faces painted, lances held low, flanking him from both sides before he could even thumb the hammer back. The woman said something sharp in Lakota, and the men halted. But they didn't lower their weapons. A tall one with 3 parallel scars across his left forearm stepped forward. The rage on his face was the controlled kind, the kind that doesn't burn hot. It burns cold.
The dog that is put down.
She'd switched to English. For his benefit, Harlan realized. The scarred warrior spat on the ground between them and said something that needed no translation. Harlan could read the word kill in any language. And then the old woman appeared. She moved between the warriors like water between stones, small, bent, one eye clouded to milk white. 70 winters had carved her face into something that looked less like skin and more like the bluffs themselves. She studied Harlan the way you'd study a track in mud, reading what it was, where it came from, and where it was headed.
He had the killing shot and chose the empty hand.
She reached up and touched 2 fingers to Harlan's chest, right over his sternum. Her blind eye seemed to see more than the good one.
Spoken.
You are bound to it now. There is no turning back.
What is happening? Tell me what this means.
The warriors went still. The scarred one, Matoska, Harlan would learn his name later, looked like he'd been struck across the face. Ihawi closed her eyes for a long breath. Harlan didn't know what a blood oath meant, didn't know what he'd agreed to by standing there with his gun lowered and an old woman's fingers pressing against his chest.
What did she just say? What's happening?
No one answered him. The wind pushed through the bluffs, moaning through the rock channels like something alive and grieving. Unki Maka turned and walked toward the valley below. The warriors followed, all except Matoska, who stood close enough for Harlan to see the tendons in his jaw working like ropes under strain. The scarred warrior turned his back, a deliberate insult, a dare, and followed the others down the trail. Ihawi was the last to move. She looked at Harlan with something he couldn't name. Not gratitude, not pity. Something older and heavier than both.
You should not have lowered your gun. But I am alive because you did.
She disappeared into the sage, and Harlan Creed stood alone on the chalky bluffs with a warm gun and the growing certainty that the life he'd been running from had just been replaced by something he understood even less. They gave him a teepee at the edge of the camp, the far edge, close to the horse line and the refuse pile. A position that said everything about how welcome he was. Willow Bend sat in a crescent-shaped valley where cottonwoods leaned over the river like old men sharing secrets. Cook fires sent thin smoke through the canopy. Dogs roamed between the lodges. Children's voices carried across the water, sharp and bright, cutting through the deeper sounds of women scraping hides and men repairing weapons. Harlan Creed sat inside his borrowed shelter and listened to a world that had no use for him. 3 days passed like that. Women brought him dried elk and turnip soup without speaking. Warriors walked past without looking. Matoska's shadow crossed the teepee entrance at dawn and dusk, regular as a guard rotation, which is exactly what it was. On the fourth morning, Harlan packed his bedroll.
Can't stay where I'm not wanted. Story of my whole damn life.
He'd made it past the horse line when her voice stopped him. Ihawi stood against the trunk of a cottonwood, arms crossed, that short bow slung over one shoulder. Morning light caught the silver conchos woven into her braids, and for a half second, Harlan forgot what he was doing.
My brother doesn't speak for the oath. Unsimaka does. And SHE says you stay.
She walked him to the river, sat on a flat stone, told him to sit. He did. Mostly because she hadn't given him a choice since the moment her arrow was pointed at his throat.
I just didn't make that choice. You don't understand.
Same thing. Twikozani waste. The blood oath. The river is our witness.
Same thing.
To life to those
She explained it in pieces, the way you'd explain water to someone who'd only ever known dust. The blood oath, Wikozani waste, bound the sparer and the spared together. His mercy had created an obligation that ran in both directions. He was responsible for her. She was responsible for him. The clan accepted the bond because Unchimaka declared it, and Unchimaka's word carried the weight of the sacred circle itself. Harlan sat with this for a long time. The river moved past them, carrying leaves and light. Ihawi laughed. It came out of her like a startled bird, sudden, bright, gone almost before you registered it, the kind of sound that changed the weather. She taught him 3 words that afternoon. Pilamaya, thank you. Waste, good. And Sunkawakan, horse. Although Harlan pronounced it so badly that 2 boys playing by the river collapsed in hysterics.
You just told the river that its horse is ugly.
He tried again. Worse. She covered her mouth, but the laughter broke through her fingers like sunlight through storm clouds. And something in Harlan's chest shifted. A door he'd nailed shut years ago, creaking open half an inch. That night, Matoska sat across the council fire from Harlan and didn't speak. But Unsimaka spoke enough for both of them, telling the story of the duel to the gathered clan. When she reached the part where Harlan lowered his gun, she paused, and in the firelight, Harlan saw Matoska's knuckles go white around his own knees. The scarred warrior's hands. Harlan noticed it then for the first time. The knuckles were torn, scabbed over, torn again. Not from fighting. The damage was on top, across the bone. The kind of marks a man makes when he strikes rock with his bare fists, because the pain inside has nowhere else to go. Harlan knew those marks. He'd carried his own version for years after the war.
What happened to
The
him?
river took him.
What's he carrying that makes him look at me like I'm the one who put it there?
Ihoi's face went still. The laughter was gone now, replaced by something ancient and careful.
2 winters ago, a white trader came to our camp. Friendly. Matoska welcomed him, fed him, trusted him.
She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The empty teepee next to Matoska's, the one no one entered, the one with faded paintings of a woman and a small child on the hide, told the rest.
Fight. At what cost?
Harlan lay in his teepee that night, staring at the smoke hole and its circle of stars. The shaking in his hands was worse than usual. Running made sense. Running always made sense. He'd been running since '63, and the formula hadn't changed. Stay too long, someone gets hurt, you carry a new ghost, you keep moving. The formula was about to break, because on the eastern ridge, where the bluffs dropped away into shadow, a campfire burned. A single point of orange against the dark, and the pattern of the flame, 2 short flares, a pause, 2 more, was a signal Harlan recognized from a life he thought he'd buried. Levi Polk had found him. The weasel-faced man walked into Willow Bend at noon like he owned the dirt under his boots. Copper-red hair catching the sun. That grin. The one that showed too many teeth and none of the truth behind them.
Playing house with the savages now? Oh. You talk too much. Walk! Hey, what's got into you?
Harlan met him at the edge of camp before the word could land where it was aimed, grabbed Levi by the collar and hauled him back toward the tree line, away from the cook fires where Ihawi's nieces were grinding corn.
You don't USE that word here. Not ever. What do you want, Levi?
What I always wanted to deliver a message and collect my FEE. Boss sent me. He's in Deadwood with what's left of the outfit. He wants his best gun back.
I made my choices. So did I. But I'm not his gun anymore.
That's the WR Hong G answer, Harlan. You know what happens when Declan's boss hears the wrong answer.
Harlan sent Levi back to the eastern ridge with nothing. No promise, no answer Voss would accept. Just a warning that the people in this valley weren't targets and weren't negotiable. Levi smiled the whole way out. That was the part that scraped Harlan's nerves raw. Levi only smiled when he knew something you didn't. The damage hit 3 hours later. Matoska burst into the council circle with Harlan's saddlebag, the one he'd hidden in his cave on the bluffs. Inside, a tin box with $47 in stolen gold, a folded warrant bearing Harlan's name and the word murder in thick black ink, and a daguerreotype of Declan Voss's gang, 8 men on horseback. Harlan Creed in the center, holding a rifle across his lap.
You see this? You see what the old woman's oath has brought into our camp? A killer, a thief, a man with a price on his head and enemies who will follow him here. Keep your children
The words hit the camp like stones dropped in still water. Circles of silence expanding outward, women pulling children close, warriors reaching for weapons not out of threat, but out of reflex. The reflex of a people who'd learned that white men's violence followed white men the way winter follows autumn. Ihoi stood by the fire. Her jaw was set, but her eyes were asking Harlan a question she already knew the answer to.
The picture? All of it?
You had every right. I'm sorry.
Harlan looked at her. He could lie. He'd been lying since before he could shave, to lawmen, to partners, to himself. The machinery of deception sat right there in his throat, oiled and ready.
It's true. All of it.
Matoska turned to Unchimaka with the warrant held high, and the grief beneath his rage finally cracked through the surface like bone through
A
skin.
white trader came to us with smiles. My wife believed his friendship. My SOA played at his feet.
They did
Silence.
not survive his
The fire
kindness.
popped. An ember floated upward and died against the darkening sky. Harlan saw it then, the whole shape of Matoska's fury laid bare. Not hatred, grief. Grief so vast it had become a country the man lived inside, with borders made of rage and walls built from the faces of every white man who looked like the one who took his family. And Harlan's face fit that template exactly.
He's right. About me. About all of it.
Unchimaka spoke. Her voice was quiet, barely above the river's murmur, but every person in camp went still to hear it.
You spoke of the man who lowered his weapon.
The oath is B-L-I-N-D, grandmother.
Perhaps. Or perhaps your grief is.
The decision is yours, Matoska. I have heard your words, Uchimaka.
Matoska gave Harlan until dawn. Leave by first light, or face a warrior's judgment at the sacred circle. No oath would protect him after sunrise. The camp scattered into whispers. Harlan sat by the dying fire and stared at his hands, shaking, always shaking, steady only when wrapped around a weapon or a lie. Ihawi came to him in the last hour of dark. She didn't sit, didn't speak for a long time. The river talked for both of them. Then she drew the bone-handled knife from her belt, the one her grandmother had carved, the one she'd held to his throat on the bluffs, and placed it in his open palm. His shaking fingers closed around the handle. She walked away. Her footsteps faded into the sound of the river, and the dark, and the cold, and the approaching dawn. Harlan Creed stood up, tucked the bone knife into his belt, and walked, not toward the horse line, not toward escape, not toward the old pattern that had kept him alive and hollow for 11 years. He walked toward the eastern ridge, toward the campfire, toward Levi Polk and Declan Voss's shadow, and every mile of blood road he'd been running from since the war ended. Alone, the knife against his hip, the dawn coming behind him like a judgment he'd finally stopped trying to outrun. The eastern ridge smelled like pine resin and cold stone. Frost had crept across the sage overnight, turning every blade into a small, white sword. Harlan's boots crunched through it as he climbed. Levi Polk sat by his dead fire, chewing jerky and cleaning a Navy Colt with a rag that had once been white. He watched Harlan approach with the lazy attention of a man who'd already decided how the conversation would end.
On you 100 times. Let's get on with it. Here's how this W works, Harlan. You come back to Deadwood with me. OR. I ride down to that pretty little camp and tell those Indians exactly where to find the $50 bounty on your head.
I'm not going back to Deadwood. You're not going in near that camp.
Levi stood, slid the Navy Colt into his belt, rolled his neck the way he always did before things turned mean.
I've got one friend, the woman whose life I didn't take. That's more than I've had in 11 years, but more than you've ever had.
A year ago, 6 months even, Harlan would have drawn. The old calculus: eliminate the threat, pack the horse, ride until the horizon swallowed him. Clean, fast, empty. His right hand hung at his side, and for the first time since Shiloh, it wasn't shaking.
More than I've had in 11 years, Levi. More than you've ever had.
Levi's hand drifted toward the Navy Colt. Harlan didn't move, didn't reach for the knife, didn't shift his weight, didn't blink. He stood on that ridge with the frost melting under his boots and the dawn bleeding copper across the chalky bluffs behind him. And he waited. Waiting was new. His whole life had been the opposite. Strike first, move fast, don't give the other man time to think. But standing still required something that violence never did. It required believing you were worth the ground beneath your feet. Levi's fingers touched the Colt's grip, curled, hesitated, because Harlan Creed was looking at him the way E. Howie had looked at Harlan on the bluffs, with the flat, settled certainty of someone who'd already accepted the outcome, whichever way it fell. And that look, from a man who'd outdrawn deputies and outlaws and one very fast soldier in Abilene. That look said, I won't shoot first, but I won't move either.
Look at me.
You don't see our AC, Creed. Living with these people has made you
Alive. That's the word you're looking for. Go tell boss. I'm done running. If he wants me, he knows where I stand.
I ain't seeing it. Keep your hands where I can see.
Levi searched Harlan's face for the bluff, for the angle, for the trick. He'd ridden with this man for 3 years and knew every tell, every flinch, every micro-expression that preceded violence. None of them were there. Levi Polk spat into the dead fire, gathered his bedroll, mounted his horse with the stiff, jerky motions of a man whose script had just been rewritten by someone else's performance.
You're a dead man, Creed. You just don't know it yet.
The horse's hooves faded east toward Deadwood. The ridge went quiet, just wind and sage and the sound of Harlan Creed breathing like a man who'd surfaced from deep water. He didn't see Mataska until the warrior stepped out of the rocks 20 yards below the ridge. The war leader had been there the whole time, watching, listening, reading the encounter the way a scout reads terrain. The two men stood in the early light with the valley between them and the bluffs above. Neither spoke. Words weren't the language this moment required. Mataska looked at Harlan's hands, steady at his sides. He looked at the bone knife, still sheathed, never drawn. He looked at the ridge where Levi had been, the threat that had walked toward his camp and been turned away, not by violence, but by a man who'd refused to use it. Mataska's scarred knuckles flexed, relaxed, flexed again. Something behind his expression shifted, not surrender, not forgiveness. A crack. The first crack in a wall built from 2 winters of frozen grief.
Could have killed him. Easier. Safer for everyone.
The silence between them held for a long breath. Then Mataska turned and walked back toward Willow Bend. He didn't invite Harlan to follow, but he didn't tell him to leave either. For Mataska, that was enough. That evening, the first snow came. Small flakes, light as ash, cold as absolution. They settled on the teepees, on the river stones, on the cottonwood branches that leaned together overhead like old friends. Harlan sat by the council fire at Willow Bend, not at the edge of camp, near the horse line and the refuse pile. Onsimaka had pointed to a spot closer to the center, between a family of 4 and a young warrior who was teaching his daughter to fletch arrows. A position that said something new. Ihoe sat beside him. She didn't speak. She was carving something from a piece of antler, small, precise cuts, her grandmother's knife moving with the confidence of 100 previous carvings. Harlan watched the snow and felt the fire's warmth on his face, and noticed his hands resting open on his knees. Still, quiet. The tremor that had lived in his fingers since 1862, gone. Not gone forever maybe, but gone tonight.
You stayed.
I stayed. Above the camp, the chalky bluffs caught the last light and held it. Bone white stone, glowing amber, then rose, then the deep blue of approaching night. On the sacred circle, the prayer ties Unkimaka had hung for the blood oath fluttered in the wind alongside one that hadn't been there yesterday. Harlan had climbed up at dawn, before the confrontation on the ridge, tied a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt to the weathered post. No one had taught him the words. No one needed to. The wind carried the prayer ties together, Lakota cloth and Confederate cotton, side by side, bound to the same post by the same wind. Some bonds are forged in blood, some in mercy. The strongest ones, in the decision to stop running and stand on ground that someone else has trusted you to share. The snow kept falling, the fire kept burning, and Harlan Creed, outlaw, killer, oath-bound stranger, sat among the people of Willow Bend and breathed with the rhythm of a world he'd finally stopped trying to escape.